Okay, let's embark on a deep dive into something truly critical today. When we typically discuss domestic abuse, who do you immediately picture as the victim? For most of us, I think a very specific image comes to mind, one shaped by, well, decades of media portrayal, public awareness campaigns, and often personal experience. It's an image that frequently centers on female victims, and rightly so. Their suffering has been historically and continues to be just immense, tragically prevalent. But what if that widely held, powerful perception is missing a significant, often hidden piece of the puzzle? What if there's a reality that's just as pervasive, just as devastating, it frequently goes unrecognized?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how our, you know, ingrained perceptions can be profoundly challenged by new and growing research. Our sources today reveal a compelling and often overlooked truth. Men, too, suffer significantly in emotionally abusive relationships. This isn't a new phenomenon, but rather an under-discussed reality that touches countless lives, often in silence and without the recognition or support they desperately need. We're talking about a reality documented by various researchers over the years, painting a picture of a persistent issue, one that is finally beginning to emerge from the shadows. The depth and breadth of this problem demand our focused attention, inviting us to look beyond conventional narratives and truly understand the experiences of male victims.
Absolutely, and that's precisely the mission of this deep dive. This is for you, the listener, whether you're meticulously preparing for, say, a crucial meeting, or catching up on a vital social issue, or maybe just driven by an insatiable curiosity about the human experience. Our goal today is to meticulously explore the often hidden impact of emotional abuse on male victims. We're drawing from a rich stack of diverse sources, cutting-edge articles, rigorous research studies, insightful expert analyses to illuminate its insidious forms, its profound and often silent consequences, and most importantly, the tangible pathways to support that do exist. Consider this your guided expedition through critical knowledge, designed to equip you with a thorough yet accessible understanding of a topic that is, well, far more complex than it appears on the surface. We're here to extract those essential nuggets of knowledge, provide surprising facts, and maybe spark those crucial aha moments that deepen your understanding.
You've hit on the core of our purpose. We're aiming to help you grasp not just what happens in these deeply damaging relationships, but why it matters, why it's essential for all of us to recognize this pattern, both on an individual and a societal level. This means providing broader context and implications that extend far beyond isolated personal experiences. To embark on this journey, we first need to lay a solid foundation by establishing some clear definitions straight from the authoritative sources we've compiled. Let's begin by asking, what exactly is abuse? Well, according to one source, abuse is defined as any repeated behavior that causes emotional, physical, or psychological harm. It's fundamentally about a dynamic where one person uses power or control to hurt, limit, or diminish another person's choices, their sense of identity, or their overall well-being. And here's where the nuance really begins to emerge, particularly for the male experience. While abuse can, of course, involve direct physical violence, our sources stress that it often operates more subtly through manipulation, silence, fear, or pressure. This subtlety, this quiet erosion, is absolutely key to understanding how men experience and endure emotional abuse, making it incredibly difficult to pinpoint and escape.
That distinction is absolutely crucial because it forces us to expand our understanding beyond, the most visible forms of violence. So if that's the definition of abuse, what then defines a victim? Because that word itself, victim, often carries a significant amount of societal baggage, doesn't it? It can imply weakness, passivity, or even culpability sometimes.
Right.
Our sources, however, provide a much clearer and more compassionate definition. A victim is simply a person who has been harmed or mistreated by another. What's particularly poignant, and something highlighted in the research, is that in abusive relationships, the person experiencing harm, the victim, may not even realize what is happening until damage is already deep. Imagine the profound confusion and pain of someone who is gradually losing their sense of self, their reality, their agency, without even identifying the source of that erosion. They might even blame themselves or feel they deserve it. This self-blame is a hallmark of emotional abuse, a devastating internalization of the abuser's narrative. But the source makes it unequivocally, powerfully clear, and I want to emphasize this with all the weight it deserves. They do not. No one ever deserves to be abused.
And this brings us to a really critical point, a profound reframe that serves as a major aha moment for many. This isn't just semantics, it's a fundamental shift in perspective. Being a victim does not in any way equate to being weak. One source articulates this directly and powerfully, stating, "It means someone has crossed your boundaries, used your trust against you, and harmed your sense of safety. That can happen to anyone, even strong, intelligent, emotionally aware men." This statement fundamentally challenges the ingrained misconception that vulnerability to abuse is a flaw in character or a lack of personal strength. It strips away the judgment and recognizes the universal human susceptibility to harm when trust is exploited and boundaries are violated.
That's a profound reframe, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes me wonder then, how does that perspective shift our understanding of what resilience truly means in the face of abuse? Because if victimhood isn't about strength or weakness, but about an experience, a violation that can befall anyone, regardless of their inherent resilience or capabilities, it completely changes the conversation around personal responsibility and blame.
Precisely. If we connect this to the broader societal picture, it fundamentally challenges a lot of ingrained assumptions about who is allowed to be a victim and what that status implies for their character. It liberates us from the restrictive stereotypes that hinder recognition and support. This redefinition opens up the conversation to truly understanding the complex, often contradictory experiences of men who find themselves trapped in these incredibly difficult situations, often against a backdrop of deeply ingrained societal expectations that emphatically tell them they shouldn't be there. This reestablishes their humanity and validates their suffering.
And that very societal backdrop, those powerful expectations, are exactly where our deep dives must continue. Because for men, the reality of emotional abuse is not merely an isolated incident. It's often an unseen epidemic, one that flies directly in the face of our traditional stereotypes of masculinity. When we historically think of domestic abuse, the image in our minds has been so often a singular one. Yet our sources reveal that emotional abuse against men is far more pervasive and nuanced than many realize. It's not confined to just one type of relationship or setting, making it incredibly difficult to identify. For instance, research tells us explicitly that it can occur in long-term partnerships, casual relationships, marriages, or even shared parenting arrangements. This is crucial. It means the abuse isn't limited by a particular kind of partner or a specific legal status. It's about the dynamic, the imbalance of power and control, wherever it exists. Imagine a man navigating a shared custody agreement where his ex-partner constantly undermines his parenting, dismisses his concerns, or threatens to limit his access to his children unless he complies with her demands. That's emotional abuse in a setting many might not immediately recognize.
And what's particularly crucial to understand is the often subtle, insidious nature of this abuse. Many men experience profound harm in ways that simply go unnoticed, either by themselves because of the gradual erosion of their reality, or by others who aren't looking for these specific red flags in a male victim. Our sources meticulously detail these insidious forms. Instead of overt physical harm, men are insulted, manipulated, blamed, humiliated, or isolated. Let's take a moment to consider each of these. Imagine someone, let's call him David, who's always been a confident professional. His partner constantly belittles his achievements, subtly implying he's not as smart or capable as he thinks he is. His emotions are systematically dismissed. If he expresses hurt or frustration, he's told he's overreacting, too sensitive, or not man enough. His finances may be controlled, perhaps through accusations of reckless spending or by limiting his access to shared accounts, making him dependent. His parenting might be threatened, with his partner constantly undermining his authority in front of the children or threatening to use the children against him in future disputes. And perhaps one of the most insidious and disorienting tactics, he may even be gaslighted into questioning his reality. These are not minor inconveniences. They're psychological assaults designed to dismantle a man's self-worth and autonomy.
Gaslighting, for anyone who hasn't deeply encountered that term, is like a slow, deliberate erosion of your entire sense of reality. It's a truly chilling form of psychological control. Imagine David experiencing this. His partner consistently denies conversations that he clearly remembers or suddenly rearranges things in their home, then vehemently denies it when he asks, making him believe he's forgetful or even paranoid. Over weeks, months, or even years, he begins to doubt his own sanity, his perceptions, his memory, even his fundamental sense of self. He might start apologizing for things he didn't do or constantly seeking external validation because his internal compass has been so thoroughly scrambled. It's a terrifying process that leaves a person profoundly disoriented and isolated.
And that very subtlety, as you've so vividly described, connects directly to the immense difficulty men face in recognizing and reporting this kind of abuse. When your reality is being systematically undermined, when your emotions are dismissed and your memories are questioned, it's incredibly hard to identify what's happening as abuse, let alone articulate it coherently to others or seek effective help. The abuser's tactics are designed to keep the victim in a state of confusion and self-doubt. This emphasizes the critical thinking aspect of needing to constantly question one's own reality when subjected to gaslighting. The very act of questioning becomes an act of self-preservation, but it's a deeply disorienting, isolating, and utterly exhausting process for the victim.
And a monumental part of why this remains so profoundly hidden, why so many men suffer in silence, is the immense societal stigma and the deeply ingrained narratives surrounding masculinity. It's not just a personal struggle. It's a powerful, almost inescapable societal straitjacket that impacts how men perceive themselves and how society perceives them.
Absolutely. The labeling theory, a foundational concept, is profoundly relevant here. It shows us that when society primarily attaches specific labels to men, labels like providers, strong, stoic, or dominant, it inherently leaves very little conceptual space to view them as victims of abuse. There's a profound cognitive dissonance at play. How can the strong one, the protector, possibly be the victim? This creates an internal and external conflict that prevents recognition. Imagine David, who has always been praised for his emotional resilience, his ability to handle anything. When he starts to feel the insidious effects of emotional abuse, the societal label of strongman conflicts so strongly with the internal experience of vulnerable victim that he might unconsciously reject the latter, making it incredibly difficult to even acknowledge his own suffering, let alone articulate it or seek help. This internal conflict is a direct manifestation of societal labeling. Then you have social learning theory, which helps explain why this silence persists through generations. Boys are often taught from a young age to hide weakness, to be stoic, to suppress emotions, to man up. When these boys grow into men, they internalize these lessons so deeply that they often stay silent, even when facing severe emotional abuse. This learned behavior perpetuates the cycle, making it incredibly difficult to break free or even acknowledge the problem, because seeking help would mean violating deeply ingrained social norms.
So what does this all mean for men like David trying to speak out? It's not just a personal struggle with an abusive partner. It's a systemic struggle against the immense weight of generations of social conditioning, bearing down on them and telling them their experience is somehow invalid or shameful.
This raises an incredibly important question. How deeply ingrained are these societal narratives, and how do they directly impede a man's ability to even perceive himself as a victim, let alone seek help? And it's not just about what men are told to be. Conflict theory suggests that systems of power often protect dominant narratives to maintain the status quo. In this context, it often leads to men being automatically seen as aggressors, even when they are being harmed. For instance, in a domestic dispute where police are called, if both partners are agitated, the default assumption often leans towards a man being the aggressor, regardless of the actual dynamic of abuse. This perception can be incredibly damaging and isolating for a male victim, compounding the initial harm with systemic disbelief and blame. It's a profound structural barrier to seeking and receiving justice or support.
The numbers truly drive this home, painting a stark, almost unbelievable picture of this unseen reality. It's hard data that quantifies this quiet suffering, creating a profound sense of urgency. For example, one study reported that a staggering 757,000 men in England and Wales experienced domestic abuse in 2024. Just let that number sink in. Nearly 750,000 men in just 1 year. This isn't a rare occurrence. It's a widespread public health issue that remains largely out of public consciousness.
And despite those incredibly high numbers, the silence surrounding it is deafening. Research showed that almost half of male victims, a shocking 49%, never speak about it. Imagine the weight of that silence. Nearly 500,000 men carrying the burden of abuse completely alone, trapped by shame, fear, and the perceived inability to articulate their pain. This is a critical indicator of the fear and stigma we've been discussing, showing a profound breakdown in communication and trust within society. The internal psychological consequences are equally stark. One study found that 1 in 4 men show signs of trauma, including post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, which often arises from prolonged, repeated trauma in intimate relationships after being emotionally abused. These are not minor effects. These are life-altering psychological injuries that can disrupt every aspect of a man's life, from his relationships to his ability to function in daily life.
And here's the most staggering imbalance, the aha moment that highlights the systemic neglect. With such a massive number of men suffering, and so many of them staying silent, you desperately hope for a robust, accessible support system, right? But the reality is grim, almost shockingly inadequate. One report reveals that across the UK, only a mere 10% of support services are specifically made with men in mind. 10%. That's an astonishing disconnect between the scale of the problem and the resources available, leaving hundreds of thousands of men with virtually nowhere to turn. It underscores how deeply ingrained the gendered perception of abuse is within our institutional structures.
These numbers don't just imply challenges, they scream profound systemic failure. The severe lack of tailored services isn't simply an oversight, it's a direct, measurable reflection of the societal stigma we discussed earlier. If society struggles to acknowledge men as victims, it naturally follows that resources and support infrastructure designed specifically for them will be minimal if they exist at all. This perpetuates a vicious cycle. Under-recognition leads to under-resourcing, which in turn reinforces the silence and isolation of male victims. This suggests a deeply entrenched issue that requires not just a policy change, but a fundamental societal shift in perception, empathy, and allocation of resources. Until then, these men remain largely invisible, unheard, and unsupported.
So, if you're a man listening to this deep dive, and any of what we've discussed so far resonates with you, or perhaps you're recognizing patterns in the life of someone you care about, we want to share some incredibly important messages gleaned directly from our sources. These are the truths that male victims desperately need to hear to begin to break through that oppressive wall of silence and self-blame. First, if someone controls or humiliates you, it is abuse. Second, emotional abuse leaves no bruises, but the scars are profoundly real and can be devastating. Third, you are not on your own. There are safe ways to get help, and you deserve that help. And finally, and perhaps most powerfully, for anyone struggling with the perception of weakness, speaking out is not weakness, it is survival. Now let's move beyond the prevalence and the profound societal barriers and start unpacking the specifics of emotional abuse itself. Its diverse forms, the calculated, often chilling tactics abusers employ, and the theoretical underpinnings that help us understand why it's so incredibly difficult to identify, resist, and ultimately escape. Our sources make it abundantly clear that while we're focusing on emotional abuse as a primary concern, it's rarely a standalone issue in these relationships. One source explains that it almost always comes together with other types, creating a complex, suffocating web of interconnected harm.
What really stands out from these sources is how these different forms of abuse aren't always separate, neatly compartmentalized issues. Instead, they frequently overlap and escalate, and a seemingly minor guilt trip can often be the thin end of the wedge, subtly expanding into significant control and fear over time. We're talking about specific categories of abuse that frequently intertwine, making the victim's experience profoundly disorienting. Our sources detail them explicitly. First, psychological abuse. This is a broad category encompassing various tactics using manipulation, gaslighting, threats, or shifting blame. Imagine David's partner constantly telling him he's worthless, or subtly twisting his words in front of friends to make him seem irrational, or threatening to reveal private information about him if he doesn't comply with her demands. These are calculated attacks on his mental and emotional state. Then there's physical abuse. This isn't just about direct, overt hitting. It's about creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. It includes behaviors like blocking the way, throwing objects near him to scare him, or using her body to physically intimidate or prevent his movement. It might not leave bruises, but the threat is palpable. Also, financial abuse. This is a pervasive form where the abuser aims to strip away economic independence. It involves taking control of money, stopping a partner's work, or exploiting resources. David might find his access to shared funds restricted, his work hours sabotaged, or his assets drained, leaving him economically vulnerable and dependent. And finally, sexual abuse. This violates bodily autonomy and personal boundaries. It encompasses pressure for unwanted sexual acts, unwanted touch, coercion, or sexual shame, making him feel obligated or dirty. As noted elsewhere, abuse rarely starts at its most severe level. It often begins with small comments or guilt trips, gradually growing into full-blown control or fear. It's an incremental process, which is why it's so incredibly difficult to identify and resist at the outset.
Okay, let's really unpack this, because it's rarely just one thing, is it?
Yeah.
These forms intertwine, creating a suffocating, almost invisible environment. It makes it exponentially harder for the victim to pinpoint what's happening, let alone articulate it or find a way out. Now, it's not a single punch. It's a constant, multifaceted erosion of a person's being. It's like trying to navigate a labyrinth where the walls are constantly shifting and the air slowly gets thinner.
Precisely. The truly insidious nature lies in how these different forms can combine, reinforce each other, and escalate over time. A seemingly minor guilt trip isn't an isolated incident. It's often the precursor to deeper control or fear, subtly shifting the power dynamic until the victim feels completely trapped and disoriented. It highlights the profound importance of recognizing the entire spectrum of abusive behaviors rather than simply waiting for overt physical violence, which is often the point of no return.
And this leads us to a disturbing yet critical insight. The abuser's calculated moves. It's not always impulsive rage or a loss of control. Our sources point to a chilling intentionality, a cold calculation behind some of these abusive actions.
Indeed. Rational choice theory offers a lens through which to understand this disturbing intentionality. It suggests that some abusers calculate their behaviors, making deliberate choices about how they inflict harm. They often choose psychological and emotional harm precisely because it is harder to prove. Unlike a physical injury, which leaves visible marks, the wounds of emotional abuse are invisible, making it incredibly difficult to gather external evidence or find legal recourse. This calculation is designed to exploit the very nature of emotional abuse, leaving the victim in a state of self-doubt, confusion, and profound isolation. For men, this is particularly painful and disorienting. As noted by one source, men like David may be told you are overreacting or mocked for feeling hurt. Their natural emotional responses, sadness, anger, confusion, are weaponized against them, further invalidating their experience and reinforcing the abuser's control.
That truly highlights the insidious nature of this calculation, doesn't it? It's not just about hurting someone, it's about systematically dismantling their reality and turning their natural human reactions, their attempts to express pain or discomfort, into further ammunition for the abuser. It's a psychological trap designed with chilling precision.
This raises a critical question. If abuse is deliberately chosen for its difficulty to prove, for its ability to evade detection and accountability, what does that tell us about the abuser's intent, and more critically, about the systemic challenges in supporting victims when the very nature of the harm is designed to remain hidden? It means that our support systems need to be incredibly nuanced, sensitive, and specifically equipped to recognize and address these covert tactics rather than relying solely on overt signs of harm. Without that understanding, victims like David are left in an impossible situation.
And we simply cannot talk about these systemic challenges, about the invisibility of male victims, without returning to the deep roots of stigma and how society actively keeps men silent. We need to revisit this with even greater depth, because it's a powerful, pervasive force shaping men from childhood. Young boys are often explicitly told to be strong, hide emotions, and stay stoic, as multiple sources consistently remind us. These traditional, often rigid sociological behaviors are not benign. They can do real and profound harm, creating an intense internal conflict that makes it nearly impossible for men like David to acknowledge, let alone process, emotional abuse when it happens to them. It's almost as if they are taught to put on a suit of emotional armor from a young age, and that armor, while perhaps protecting them from some external threats, also prevents them from feeling, processing, or expressing internal pain or vulnerability.
To elaborate on that, strain theory, a sociological concept, offers a deeper understanding of this internal conflict you've described. It shows that when pressure is too high, when these societal expectations for stoicism and strength become overwhelming and unattainable in the face of emotional abuse, men can break down, lash out, or shut down feelings just to cope with struggles. This isn't a sign of inherent weakness. It's a natural, albeit often damaging, psychological and emotional response to overwhelming societal and personal strain. Men like David suppress their pain, believing it's the only acceptable way to conform to what's expected of them, leading to long-term psychological and physical consequences. This deeply ingrained social conditioning essentially disarms them from being able to effectively process and articulate emotional pain.
That's a powerful analogy, the emotional armor. And this pressure creates a kind of psychic prison, doesn't it? Society expects them to be this unyielding block, a rock, but their internal experience is fluid, vulnerable, and deeply wounded. This internal dissonance is utterly exhausting and profoundly isolating.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates how deeply ingrained social constructs can fundamentally obscure reality, making it incredibly difficult for men to identify themselves within the victim narrative, which is predominantly feminine in societal perception. This is further compounded by the fact that the label of abuser is also gendered, as conflict theory highlights. Systems of power often protect dominant narratives, and in relationships, this often means men are automatically seen as aggressors, even when they are being harmed. End quote. Consider a scenario where David finally gathers the courage to seek help or report abuse. The immediate, often subconscious bias in many institutions might be to view him as the potential aggressor, even without evidence. This creates a devastating double bind. The very act of seeking help can inadvertently reinforce the very stigma and misperception he's trying to escape.
It's a double bind that is truly debilitating. You're expected to be strong and stoic, but if you are harmed, if your armor cracks, you're either disbelieved or automatically cast as the perpetrator. It makes the prospect of speaking out feel not just impossible, but actively dangerous.
And that's precisely why it's absolutely critical to reaffirm what our sources state so powerfully and unequivocally. Victimhood does not follow gender, it follows harm. This is a fundamental truth we must embrace. And emotional abuse is not about who is stronger physically or even emotionally in a traditional sense. It is about who has the power to harm the other emotionally and psychologically. This fundamentally shifts the focus from perceived gender roles, from outdated notions of strength, to the actual dynamic of power and control in the relationship, which is the true, unbiased heart of abuse. It's a crucial distinction that opens the door to recognizing all victims, regardless of gender.
Shifting gears slightly, let's talk about something incredibly practical and crucial for anyone navigating these treacherous waters. Recognizing the red flags of toxic relationships. Because while victims often don't fully realize they are in an abusive situation until too late, our sources tell us that the signs are often there, subtly, insidiously, long before the full extent of the damage is visible. These aren't always glaring, dramatic moments. They're often a slow, creeping accumulation of small, unsettling behaviors.
What really stands out in the research is how these subtle indicators often manifest first as internal feelings of confusion, self-doubt, or anxiety, rather than overt conflict. This makes them incredibly hard to name definitively as abuse in the early stages. Our sources detail these specific red flags. You might find your partner monitors your messages or social media, a profound invasion of privacy that limits your autonomy. Or you fear their reactions or mood swings, leading you to constantly walk on eggshells, tailoring your behavior to avoid an explosion. They might use guilt to make you feel responsible for their emotions, a common manipulation tactic that burdens you with their emotional state. A chilling and pervasive sign is when you stop seeing your friends or family because it is easier than dealing with your partner's anger or disapproval, illustrating the insidious isolation they impose. And crucially, and something David might experience, they constantly criticize, mock, or question your memory, chipping away at your self-esteem and your very sense of reality. These are not minor character flaws, they are deliberate tactics of control.
That last one sounds a lot like the gaslighting we discussed earlier, doesn't it? It's a gradual, relentless erosion. And the sources point out that over time, these actions make you feel smaller, isolated, or afraid. And that is when control solidifies into abuse. It's not an isolated event. It's a systematic process. And for you, the listener, whether you see these in your own life or someone you know, it's vital to recognize them. Let me ask you directly, without judgment. Are you seeing any of these patterns? Do they dismiss your feelings or call you too sensitive when you try to express yourself? Do you find yourself apologizing all the time, even when you know you've done nothing wrong, just to keep the peace? Have you lost touch with people you care about because your partner implicitly or explicitly discouraged those relationships? Do you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells around them, terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing? These aren't just minor annoyances or personality quirks. They are clear and undeniable indicators of a deeply unhealthy, potentially abusive dynamic that needs to be addressed.
And this is precisely why it's vital to anchor ourselves with some fundamental reality checks directly from our sources to cut through the confusion and self-doubt. First, and unequivocally, abuse is not just physical. Emotional control is just as dangerous, often more so because its wounds are invisible. Second, jealousy, control, and guilt trips are not love. They are manipulation, and they are inherently abusive. And perhaps most importantly, to validate the internal experience. If you feel confused or afraid, it is okay to question what is happening. Your feelings are valid, and they are signals you should pay attention to. These statements serve as powerful anchors in a sea of confusion and gaslighting, offering clarity and permission to trust your own intuition.
The psychological and social toll of this silent suffering on men is profound, stretching far beyond what's immediately visible. Our sources are very clear. Men facing emotional abuse often suffer in silence. The effects are very real and serious, often accumulating over years, and deeply altering their sense of self. We're not talking about fleeting discomfort here. We're talking about fundamental changes to a person's mental and emotional landscape.
The impacts are incredibly wide-ranging, affecting nearly every aspect of a man's life. Research lists severe and persistent consequences like depression, anxiety, and chronic sleep problems, often leading to profound physical and mental exhaustion. Victims often experience a volatile emotional landscape, oscillating between feeling emotionally numb as a coping mechanism or experiencing sudden, uncontrollable anger, which can be deeply disorienting and frightening. Their professional lives frequently suffer with struggles with focus, burnout, or poor work results, as the mental energy required to navigate an abusive relationship leaves little left for anything else. And perhaps most tragically, there's a profound loss of self-confidence or even sense of identity as the abuser systematically dismantles who they are. These aren't just symptoms, they're core assaults on a person's being, leaving them a shadow of their former selves.
Now, here's where it gets truly interesting and incredibly insightful. Carl Jung's theories, though developed decades ago, give us a deeper psychological lens to understand these complex mechanisms at play. They allow us to delve below the surface of observable behaviors and into the profound, often unconscious dynamics.
What's fascinating here is how Jung's concepts can illuminate the insidious dynamics of emotional abuse. Jung wrote extensively about shadow projection, a psychological defense mechanism where a person throws their own hidden anger, pain, or undesirable traits onto someone else. In abusive relationships, this might manifest as the abuser, let's say David's partner, projecting her own insecurities, failures, or hidden anger onto David, blaming him for all the problems in the relationship or even in her own life. This externalization of internal conflict is a powerful abusive tactic, effectively offloading their own issues onto the victim and making him carry their psychological burden. Furthermore, Jung's concept of anima and animus imbalance is highly relevant to male victims. The anima represents a man's inner feminine qualities, vulnerability, emotional receptivity, empathy, and the capacity to process his feelings. When a man, through societal conditioning, consistently suppresses his anima, forcing himself to embody only traditionally masculine traits like stoicism and emotional detachment, he may become utterly unable to process emotional abuse effectively. He doesn't have the internal tools or the permission to feel, articulate, or address the profound emotional pain. He often endures, rationalizes, and stays, often at the cost of his health, believing it's his role to simply absorb the pain. This cultural suppression of emotionality can create a profound and dangerous vulnerability to abuse.
This raises an incredibly important question. How does the suppression of these anima qualities, often culturally reinforced from childhood, through messages like "boys don't cry," make men uniquely vulnerable to the long-term, insidious effects of emotional abuse? It's almost as if they're disarmed, psychologically speaking, from being able to defend themselves against emotional attacks because they've been taught to ignore rather than engage with their emotional inner world.
Exactly. The lack of internal tools to process and articulate emotional pain, combined with the societal stigma against vulnerability, means the abuse simply accumulates, festering beneath the surface. It's not processed, so it cannot heal. This accumulation directly leads to the severe mental health impacts we just discussed, like depression, anxiety, and PTSD, because the trauma has nowhere to go. And these hitting facts about men's mental health are truly alarming, painting an even graver picture of this crisis. Even as cases of male domestic abuse are undeniably on the rise, the reported numbers are still hard to trust because many men do not report what happens. This profound underreporting creates a distorted public picture of the problem, making it seem less prevalent than it truly is, which in turn leads to less funding and fewer resources.
And the data on help seeking is equally sobering and, frankly, heartbreaking. One source found that about 40% of abused men never go for professional help. That's nearly half of all male victims, suffering in complete silence, isolated and alone. And for those who do try, for those brave enough to reach out, the experience is often disappointing and invalidating. Research reported that from those who seek help, only a shocking 1 in 5 feel someone truly listened to them. That's an 80% rate of dissatisfaction and invalidation, which only reinforces the silence and makes future help seeking even less likely. It's a systemic failure to respond with empathy and understanding.
And tragically, the stakes are incredibly high, far beyond just emotional pain. Research has linked emotional abuse to over a third of suicide attempts where men cited relationship problems as a factor. Let's just sit with that for a moment. Over a third of male suicide attempts linked to relationship problems where emotional abuse is a factor. That's not just a statistic, that's countless lives, countless families shattered, countless individuals driven to the absolute brink. This is a critical, sobering fact that underscores the devastating, life-threatening impact of this kind of abuse when it goes unaddressed and unsupported. The compounding factors of shame and fear make it worse, as other studies highlight. Men like David may stay silent because they feel embarrassed, believing their situation makes them less of a man. They worry profoundly about losing their children in a system that often harbors a bias towards mothers, and they fear false blame, a very real concern for many, where their genuine cries for help might be twisted against them, labeling them as the abuser.
That's the devastating reality of this crisis. This isn't just about feeling sad or stressed. It's about a profound, life-threatening crisis that is largely ignored. The silent suffering is leading to catastrophic outcomes, quite literally costing men their lives.
Connecting the high suicide rate to the cumulative impact of all the factors we've discussed, the pervasive societal stigma, the profound lack of tailored support services, the cultural suppression of emotions that prevents internal processing, and the legitimate fear of disbelief or false accusation, it paints a picture of intense isolation, hopelessness, and utter desperation. For many men like David, the emotional pain, coupled with the lack of any perceived escape route or validation, becomes an unbearable burden carried completely alone, leading to such tragic ends.
And what's particularly insidious is that there often affects subtle internal shifts that you might not immediately link to abuse, but our sources show they are common, pervasive indicators. Things like constant tension or an ever-present fear of arguments, making every interaction a potential minefield, or trouble sleeping or recurring nightmares that invade your subconscious. Perhaps you're feeling like you're always on edge, constantly hypervigilant and unable to relax. Or you might find yourself thinking about leaving the relationship but feeling frozen or guilty, paralyzed by fear or manipulated into staying. These are subtle internal experiences, but they are nonetheless screaming signs of deep distress and emotional trauma.
And this is precisely why it is so dangerous. Our sources tell us, starkly, that men often normalize emotional abuse because they think they should handle it. This internalization, this belief that they must simply tough it out, is lethal. Unprocessed trauma affects physical health, brain function, and parenting, creating long-term, cascading consequences that ripple through their entire lives and even impact their children. And the starkest warning, one that cannot be overstated: ignoring it does not protect you, it slowly, insidiously destroys you, chipping away at your spirit, your health, and your very existence until there's nothing left. This highlights the urgent, life-saving need for intervention and support.
So we've explored the hidden reality, the diverse forms of abuse, and its devastating impacts. Now let's pivot to something incredibly empowering: breaking the silence. We know there are immense barriers, but understanding them is not just an academic exercise. It's the very first step towards dismantling them and forging pathways to support and recovery. Let's recap some of those key barriers, straight from the sources, that explain why men stay silent, often against their own desperate desire for help.
What's truly fascinating here is the cyclical nature of these barriers, the pervasive societal expectations that initially cause the silence, then, cruelly, exacerbate the lack of belief or support when a man does finally try to speak out. Our sources outline these vividly, each one a significant hurdle for men like David. First, they fear not being believed. Imagine sharing your deepest pain only to be met with skepticism or outright dismissal. Then, they fear being blamed or labeled as abusers, which is a significant and often legitimate concern given societal biases. Also, they worry they will lose their children, a potent and often weaponized threat used by abusers to maintain control. And they do not want to look weak, tying directly into those deeply ingrained masculine ideals of stoicism we discussed. And often, they do not know who can trust and where to go with the struggles, a profound lack of accessible male-specific resources and trusted avenues for help. It's not just a single obstacle, it's a minefield of emotional, social, and practical hurdles that can feel utterly overwhelming.
It takes incredible, almost superhuman courage for men to even contemplate breaking this silence, given all these formidable barriers. The immense weight of societal expectations of masculinity makes it exponentially harder to reach out. But it's also absolutely critical to hear this and to internalize it. Help does exist, and it is confidential, as our sources remind us. You are not asking for a favor. You are seeking a fundamental right to safety and support.
And a crucial, empowering part of taking back control, of reclaiming your own reality, is learning how to spot manipulation. We need to be clear. Not every disagreement or conflict in a relationship counts as abuse. Healthy relationships involve disagreements, but manipulation often shows clear, repetitive, and insidious patterns designed to undermine and control.
Give us some tangible, real-world examples of these manipulation tactics that a listener, perhaps David, can identify in their own life. What do these patterns look and feel like on a daily basis?
Our sources list several key patterns of manipulation that are vital to recognize. One common tactic is being punished with silence or made to feel guilty. This might involve David's partner giving him the cold shoulder for days, refusing to communicate, or constantly reminding him of past perceived slights to induce guilt. Another deeply disorienting tactic is when your partner twists reality or denies words they already said. This is classic gaslighting, making David question his own memory and sanity. Then there's the love bombing tactic. After hurting you, they love bombing, so you doubt yourself. Showering David with intense affection and apologies immediately after a period of intense abuse, creating immense confusion and making him doubt his perception of the abuse itself. And finally, you often end up fixing things repeatedly even when it is not your fault, perpetually taking responsibility for problems caused by your partner, exhausting your emotional resources, and reinforcing your role as the fixer. These are not isolated incidents. They are consistent, calculated indicators of a manipulative, abusive dynamic.
This raises an incredibly important question. How does recognizing these specific patterns, even small ones, empower the victim to reclaim their reality, especially after experiencing the profound disorienting effects of gaslighting? It's like putting on glasses and suddenly seeing clearly after years of blurry vision, isn't it?
It's precisely that. Noticing these patterns, identifying them for what they truly are, is the very first critical step to break them. It's the moment of internal validation, where a man like David can look at a pattern of behavior and say, my perception isn't wrong. This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is a pattern of manipulation and abuse. This foundational recognition is what allows for the possibility of seeking external help, of trusting outside perspectives, and ultimately of beginning the arduous but essential journey of breaking free. It shifts the power dynamic back towards the victim, even in a small way.
So once these patterns are recognized, once that clarity begins to emerge, what are some practical, actionable coping strategies, some first steps to safety that our sources recommend? Because the idea of taking action, especially when you feel so depleted and controlled, can feel utterly overwhelming.
What's truly fascinating here, and incredibly important, is the emphasis our sources place on both internal validation, the powerful truth that you do not need a proof to be heard, alongside concrete, practical, external steps. This dual approach addresses both the profound psychological and the practical needs of someone in this incredibly vulnerable situation. Our sources provide clear, actionable advice. First, keep a journal. It helps you track events and emotions, creating an objective record of what's happening, which is invaluable when your reality is being questioned. Second, reach out to one person you trust. Even a text is enough to break the crushing isolation and begin to rebuild a support network. Third, create a private backup of important documents, a vital safety measure for practical and legal reasons. Fourth, use safe online forums like Mankind Initiative or Survivors UK for anonymous peer support, shared experiences, and information. And finally, speak to your GP or university well-being team to access professional medical and mental health help. The crucial reassurance embedded in all this advice is you do not need a proof to be heard. Your experience is valid without needing external evidence to corroborate your pain.
These are small, tangible steps, but they are incredibly powerful for regaining a sense of agency and control when you feel like you've lost everything. It's about taking back pieces of your life, one journal entry, one text, one secure document at a time.
Absolutely. The emphasis on both internal validation and concrete actions provides a holistic approach to regaining control, slowly but surely rebuilding a sense of self and safety. And it's not just about individual actions, there's also a systemic framework in place to offer support, though it requires greater awareness, multi-agency help, and the victim's code.
This is critical because many men might not even be aware they have specific, legally recognized rights as victims. The Victim's Code of Practice sets out clear rights for everyone who has suffered abuse, regardless of gender. These are not privileges. These are fundamental rights designed to ensure dignity and support. They include being acknowledged and treated with respect by all agencies, getting clear information about what support is available, so you're not left guessing, protection from threats or intimidation, which is vital for safety, and access to both emotional and legal help, ensuring comprehensive support. These are enshrined rights, ensuring the listener feels empowered, not beholden to goodwill.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Victim's Code represents a systemic attempt to counterbalance the profound individual isolation experienced by victims, particularly when they interact with the justice system. Beyond the code, there's the broader concept of multi-agency support, which, as highlighted in the research, is designed to create a comprehensive safety net. This system brings together police, health services, housing support, education providers, and charities, offering better, more coordinated protection and assistance. Imagine David needing help not just from a counselor, but also needing advice on housing, legal aid, or even support for his children. This integrated approach aims to ensure that victims don't fall through the cracks between different services and have a comprehensive, interconnected pathway to recovery and safety.
And importantly, for anyone listening who needs immediate help, who is recognizing themselves or someone they know in this deep dive, we want to give you direct resources. These are confidential places you can turn to right now, today.
These are vital points of contact, offering immediate confidential support. Victim Support UK. You can call them on 0808 1689 111. That's available 247. Mankind Initiative. Their number is 01823 334 244. Samaritans. For 204/7 emotional support, call 116 123. If you're a student, your university well-being service often offers specialized mental health support, and Citizens Advice can provide invaluable financial and legal help. These services are there for you. Reaching out is a powerful step. #tag outro.
So what does all of this mean? It means the narrative surrounding domestic abuse is far, far more complex and nuanced than we often assume. We've journeyed from a widely held perception of who a victim is to a deep dive into the hidden, devastating reality that men are also significant victims of emotional abuse. We've seen how this abuse is often subtle, insidious, and profoundly impactful, and how societal stigma plays a huge, devastating role in keeping these men silent and isolated. But crucially, and this is the message we want you to carry forward, help is available, and taking action, even those small, incremental steps, is not a sign of weakness. It's a profound act of strength, resilience, and self-preservation.
What's truly fascinating here is the comprehensive journey we've taken. From societal misconceptions and deeply ingrained biases to concrete steps towards recovery and the systemic support that does exist. It encourages, and indeed demands, critical thinking about how we view victimhood, and the immense courage it takes for individuals to challenge those ingrained biases, both within themselves and in the wider world. To wrap this up, our sources want to leave you with some powerful, reassuring statements directly to you, the listener, who may be grappling with these issues. You deserve this.
Be heard without judgment.
To protect your peace and your future.
To raise your children in safety, free from the shadow of abuse.
To feel like yourself again, to reclaim your identity.
And to recover, at your own pace, with the support you deserve.
If victimhood truly follows harm and not gender, what deeper, more fundamental changes are still required in our society, in our institutions, in our healthcare systems, and most critically, in our personal conversations to ensure that all victims, regardless of their gender, are equally seen, equally heard, equally believed, and equally supported? It's a question that demands our continued attention and collective action.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive and for opening your mind to a crucial, often overlooked, and deeply human aspect of experience. We sincerely hope this deep dive has provided you with clarity, context, and perhaps a path forward toward understanding, healing, or advocating for those who suffer in silence.